is doing well, staying safe. So I just wanted to take a few minutes and talk about cryptocurrencies, where we are headed and where we are coming from. My name is Ravi. I'm a big Bitcoin fanboy, and I will be structuring this presentation in three parts. I'll start by talking about where we are coming from, what cryptocurrencies are. And the second part will be about Bitcoin, what it is, how it works, and finally, we'll talk about where we are going as a society and what will be the role of Bitcoin in the future. So, to get started, cryptocurrencies in themselves are a very nascent field, literally invented 10 years ago along with Bitcoin. And but the field itself comes from a combination of two fields that are much, much older. So, cryptography is, as we know, a field that is really, really old. It's the ancient art and science of communicating in an insecure environment where there could be eavesdroppers, but you want to make sure your message is transferred securely. Um, More recently, with the advent of digital communication and algorithms, there have been formal methods that have been invented to provably guarantee um, secure communication. So the first breakthrough happened in the 1970s with the advent of public key cryptography systems like RSA. And the idea here is you can simulate a form of a digital signature. And what that means is, let's say there are two parties, A and B, and A wants to send a message to B and sign it so that B can be sure that this is coming from A. So there is this notion of a public key and a private key for A. And what A can do is sign that message or encrypt that message with its private key, which only A knows. And then the corresponding public key for A is known to everyone. And B can then decrypt that same message with the corresponding public key. So that way, B knows that this encrypted message is indeed coming from A because only A knew the private key in theory, right? So this way, it's a form of digital signature. And this system is powering most of online activity today, like net banking, e-commerce, and so on. It's the backbone of modern internet. The second breakthrough, which was much more recent, was that of cryptographic hash functions like SHA-256. And the idea here is that there is this class of functions which take in a string or any text and can output a numeric representation of that text. And doing this is fairly straightforward, like it can happen very quickly. But if you had the number to get the string back, which gave you that number, would take a long time. It would be very compute intensive to reverse this function. So these are also known as one-way functions. So let's just take an example so that it's clear. Let's say I type a word hello, right? So the string you see here, this is the hex representation of hello, and it's a 256-bit representation. And you can see that if I just remove one character, the string completely changes. If I remove one more, it just completely changes. So there is almost no pattern here. Like it just changes almost randomly. And again, if I gave you this string, it would be almost impossible to get back these three letters that would give you this string. The best approach is to literally just try all possible uh, strings until you hit this number, which will take a long time. Another thing to note here is if I asked you find a possible string that started with a zero, right? So it turns out that incidentally, and just a coincidence that the word hell starts with 10, right? If I asked find a string which will start with two zeros, again, the best guess is to literally just keep trying till you hit upon a representation that starts with 20. So it's going to be harder. Three zeros is going to be even harder, right? So this is a form of a puzzle that will be useful in implementing Bitcoin later on. Okay, so this is about cryptography. The second, uh, arguably a deeper field that sort of makes cryptocurrencies interesting is that of currency itself, or like a proxy for money. So, what is money? Clearly, it makes the world go round. It's very important for day-to-day life. But there is a certain set of criteria that are needed for anything to be considered money. And those are that, first of all, it should be considered as a store of consensus wealth. And the two key words here are store and consensus. Store because it needs to have my confidence, whatever I am claiming to be money, that it's going to retain its value in some form over time, today, tomorrow, day after. That is why I'm spending the time and effort to acquire it, to secure it. It is a store of some form. And then not just my personal confidence, it needs to have the confidence of a consensus or probably the entire society. So money is a social construct. It only works if a majority believes in it, right? So there's the shared myth involved here. Secondly, it must work well as a medium of exchange. Money is mostly used for trading, right? So you need to have it in a form where you can transfer ownership or transfer the actual money itself fairly easily. Thirdly, it must work well as a unit of account. You usually do math using money, you do unitary math. So it needs to be numeric in some form or the other. And finally, it should be uh, easy to verify if something is real or fake. So it should have almost an unforgeable scarcity. That means you cannot just have twice as much as today, tomorrow, right? Because money, in some sense, needs to be a closed system. That's why optimizing for money is kind of not a very virtuous thing because it's a zero-sum game. If someone has more, it is at a cost of someone else having less or another part of the system having less. So some examples of money, of course, are precious metals, gold and silver, fiat money like US dollar, Indian rupees, commodities like copper, Bitcoin, time, right? Another form of money or a way to classify money is in these three types. Um, so the type one form of money is can also be called hard money or physical money. And whenever societies are coming off of a war or they're just being reorganized, so this hasn't happened in the recent memory, but what you want is you want to maximize credibility. There is not enough trust built in the system, so you need to have money that is physically um, present, that is uh, literally there, right? So most societies start off with these metal coins that you have to carry on you. As trust builds in the system, there is more flexibility. You start to defer to a third party or a trusted party, and that party starts to issue you banknotes or claims on hard money. So you say that, hey, I don't have the money on me right now, but here is a signed note from this dignitary or a bank who can vouch for me, who says that I have this money, right? And then eventually you land in the system where we are today and have been for a century, where it's all anything goes almost. It's you maximize the credit and you have a lot of trust in the system. And essentially, most of money is notional, right? And that is where we are today, like I said. Um, and this does give you a lot of flexibility. Like you can literally, it's a theoretical construct at this point. You can invent money, and eventually that causes problems, as we'll see, but that is where we are today. It does enable a lot of free trade and fluid trade. So before we step into Bitcoin, let's understand what's the main problem today and why Bitcoin uh, can solve it, right? So the central problem here is that it has been seen time and time again that centralized authorities tend to mismanage money. And The just like whenever there's a ailment in the human body, one of the first symptoms that shows up is a fever or a headache, right? In the case of the economy, the first symptom that shows up is inflation. And just like the body temperature needs to be in a certain band, inflation needs to be in a certain band. If it's outside of that band, there is something wrong, right? And it has been for the most part. So if it's negative inflation, this is known as deflation, and that is bad for the economy. Why? Deflation means that the value, the price of things goes down over time, right? So let's say, um, so what that means is it makes paying sorry, not debt, um, harder over time. Why? Because let's say I take a 5% loan for 100 rupees, I have to pay back 105 rupees next year. But even 100 rupees is more valuable next year. So 105 is even more valuable, and I may not be able to pay it off. Secondly, it incentivizes people to hoard money. If price of goods is coming down, why should I buy them today? I'll buy them tomorrow. So there is more constriction in the economy. And the other side, hyperinflation, when it's above a certain level, is also bad for the exact opposite reasons. On the other side of that loan trade, the person giving you a 5% loan is less willing to do so because 105 rupees next year is going to be less valuable than 100 rupees is today. So why should I loan you out today, right? And similarly, price of goods becomes more expensive over time. So, and like I said, historically, governments or centralized controls, kingdoms haven't had a great track record in managing inflation. So you can see most currencies in like a 150-year period have either lost all their value or 99% of their value, right? Even the US dollar, one of the most stable currencies in the last 100 years, has lost 95% of its value. That's why they say it's not a great idea to keep your money in currencies or in cash for longer periods of time. So now, how does Bitcoin solve this, right? So before we understand that, let's just first quickly understand how it works, right? So Bitcoin is currency invented on the internet, right? So just like any other internet protocol, it is best described as a network protocol, right? So in particular, it's a network protocol to reach consensus on a sequence of transactions without trust. And consensus again is important because money needs consensus. And transactions is how you express um, this uh, Bitcoin economy, right? So let's understand this protocol in as an overview, right? Okay, so essentially the high level picture is you have a set of transactions that are grouped together in chunks known as blocks and are linked together um, to create this blockchain kind of a data structure. And that's why Bitcoin is also known as a blockchain in many cases. So let's just go over a quick overview of how this works. So at the center of all of this is a transaction. And a transaction basically is someone paying someone else an amount at some point in time, right? So it's a source, a destination, a timestamp, an amount, and a signature, right? So Alice paying Charlie 50 ledger dollars, and the signature is of Alice, right? To prove to Charlie and everyone else that this did, in fact, come from Alice, right? How we do the signature is again the um, public key cryptography idea I was referring to. Right? So now that is the transaction. Now there are these special type of nodes or computers on the network which are known as miners, and what they do is they continuously listen for and group signed transactions, right? So they verify that this is a signed transaction, it's valid, and they group them together into, let's say, 1,000 transactions, right? Once they get these 1,000 transactions, what they do is they do this process of mining, which is they mine the nonce, right? So the nonce is the special number. You can see three um, particular nonces in these examples, where if you put the nonce and then you take the SHA-256 of the entire block, right? What you get is a number which starts with, let's say, 30 zeros, so 35 zeros. That number can vary, but let's take 30 zeros, right? So like we saw in that example of public cryptographic hash functions, this is a very hard problem to do. So if you have been able to find a SHA-256 that starts with 30 zeros, that means you found this nonce. Um, you would have had spent a lot of time and effort in this, right? Because you can't just randomly pick a number that starts with 30 zeros and find a nonce that gives you that number as a hash, right? So you had to literally pick various different nonces that would have finally one of them would have worked, right? So this nonce is also known as a proof of work because it was a proof to the amount of electricity and time you spent in getting this SHA-256 starting with 30 zeros, right? So now that you have this at this step, you have a block of signed transactions, a nonce. You have the hash of the previous block to link it up to this chain. And for all of this, what you get is what's known as a block reward. So these are new Bitcoins that are created out of thin air as a monetary reward to you. And that is my economic incentive to keep doing this. So I get back some new Bitcoins to me. And that is how all of this thing keeps on going, right? It sort of proverbially runs the trains on time, right? But now we are not done yet. Why? Because this is a decentralized distributed algorithm. So what could happen is, let's say I'm a miner. Up till now, there have been 9 blocks on this chain, right? And I'm mining the 10th block. I'm successful. I link everything up and I broadcast that, hey, this is the 10th block. All is well and good. Um, but it's possible that at the same time, somewhere else, someone else may have also found out the 10th block, right? Maybe with the same nonce or a different nonce, maybe with an entirely different set of transactions. So what do we do then, right? If this is a conflict, this is um, there's something wrong here, right? So what the protocol says is that if I hear another block which also claims to be the 10th block, I have to locally fork the chain temporarily in my view of the world, right? So there is the 10th block that I mined, and there is the 10th block that I heard someone else mined, right? And then I'll have to wait till one of these chains clearly wins out in terms of its length, right? And it could not just be two branches, there could be three, four, 10 branches, right? Depending on how the network is evolving. But the hope or the almost the guarantee is that eventually one of these chains will win out. Why? Because the network will start to consolidate branches. Some of these nodes will start backing off. Maybe I will back off and say that, okay, I'll give up. Let me just accept this other block and start working on top of it, right? Um, and eventually, you will get a single chain that wins out. That's why this algorithm is also known as eventually consistent um, algorithm, right? And then you reach consensus. This solution is to a famous problem known as Byzantine generals problem. So this is essentially how Bitcoin works, right? So you have been able to establish a list of accounts of various parties and in terms of transactions between them, right? And have an economic incentive to nodes maintaining the database and the history of all these transactions. Okay, so let's quickly look into some of the characteristics of Bitcoin. So the first and probably the most important is predefined inflation. So we talked about how inflation is probably the a very big um, indicator of an unhealthy economy, right? So incidentally, Bitcoin just fixes it by saying that, hey, there will be a predefined inflation. So algorithmically, it's been defined how new Bitcoins are created um, in the system. And like we said, every block new Bitcoins are created, right? Then go to the miner. That amount halves every 210,000 blocks. And incidentally, a few months ago was the most recent halving, was the fourth one. And now we have 6.25 Bitcoins created every block. In total, only 21 million Bitcoins will ever be mined, right? So you can see around the year 2140, all the Bitcoins that can be mined will be mined. And at that point, the amount of inflation will essentially drop to 0%, which is great. Like that is a sign of stability. Incidentally, even today, there are currencies in the world which have 0% inflation. Notably, Swiss franc is one of them. But the difference here is that you cannot manipulate it, even if you want to mess with the system. That's why it's considered a more principled system to base your economy on. However, there is the flip side today is that of being highly volatile, highly, highly volatile. Um, there are many ways to look at volatility, but one of them, one of my favorite, is to look at the daily movements in Bitcoin prices, right? So what this graph shows once it loads is how Bitcoin has performed day to day through the years. So looking back to 2013 up till 2019 last year, if you can see the light blue is just taking the top 10 best days of Bitcoin every year, right? And then the dark blue is the other 355 days. So the performance on the other 355 days and the top 10. So you can see every year there's such a wide spread. The top 10 days, it can literally grow multiples. Whereas if you remove them, it has dropped precipitously, right? Except the years 2016 and 2017, Bitcoin has dropped almost every year. Um, um, if you remove the 10 best days. And if you remove the 10 best days, it's actually dropped 44% annually. Like it's almost halved every year if you just remove the 10 best days. And otherwise, if you include the 10 best days, it's almost doubled every year. So it's crazy amount of volatility, right? So probably the best way is to just hold it if you want to be an investor. There's no point timing it. Um, Another thing that sometimes interests people is who controls it, right? Famously, we don't know who created Bitcoin. There is no company, or organization, or developer behind it. They go by the name Satoshi Nakamoto, but we don't know who they are. But today, there are three main stakeholders that essentially run Bitcoin. They're the miners, which we talked about, who run the underlying infrastructure, um, verify the signed transactions, maintain the database, so on. There are the users like you and me who buy and sell Bitcoin, hopefully use it for engaging in commerce. And then finally, there are the programmers who will implement bug fixes and um, build newer applications on top of Bitcoin, like Lightning Network and so on. And it's an interplay of these three parties. Okay, finally coming to the role of Bitcoin in the future, right? Like what is it? Like it's sort of like has got people left of field. No one really knows what it can do. There are of course various views on how important this is and so on. So these two are probably the most commonly believed theories. First is that of an insurance policy against today's economic system messing up big time. And this is essentially sort of the digital gold or gold 2.0 story where this is a better form of gold, right? A more algorithmic, predictable form of gold. And if it is a way to balance your portfolio and asset allocate accordingly, um, it's supposed to be uncorrelated or not as correlated to other assets, and less manipulated, right? The second one, which I believe is much more favorable to everyone in the system, because nothing has to mess up or blow up, is it deregulates money supply, right? Especially enables economic inclusion across borders, right? So imagine Facebook's Libra or Square payments enabling commerce between people from two different nations who have never engaged in economic um, coordination because of some obscure reason that they don't speak the same language or don't follow the same religion and so on. So Bitcoin just does cuts through all of that, right? Another thing that sometimes trumps people is what about those other cryptocurrencies they keep hearing about, um, Stellar, whatever. So there are actually 5,000, more than 5,000 other cryptocurrencies, and they're each solving something interesting and specific. There are a bunch of scams there too, but their utility honestly is not clear, at least not clear to me. Um, Ethereum is probably something that can be interesting in the future, but Bitcoin, especially for the insurance policy use case, is probably all you need. Um, as a parting comment, I would just say that you know how somewhere around the mid 2000s it was realized that not every company needs to have its own digital infrastructure, right? Cloud computing emerged as a way to outsource your digital infrastructure, your servers, your databases to a company that specializes in this field, right? Like Amazon or Microsoft. Similarly, it may turn out that not every country needs to have its own federal bank, right, or its own currency. They can outsource their monetary policy to Bitcoin because it is a sound monetary policy, especially it doesn't allow inflation. So it's kind of everyone has a level playing field. Um, Today, the reserve currency of the world, of course, is US dollar. When we say that China's GDP is um, touching that of US GDP, we price both of those GDPs in US dollars. And I doubt that when China's GDP crosses, if and when China's GDP crosses America's GDP, it will still be priced in US dollars because that's a paradigm shift, right? Maybe it will be priced in Bitcoin, maybe it will be priced in yuan, I don't know. But in any case, I would just like to motivate everyone to look more into this space. I have some references for you, and definitely feel free to reach out. This is a very exciting space. Thank you so much, and have a great day.